telling me last month Tucker Carlson warned Trump that he might be assassinated if he didn't pick J.D. Vance or another non-Neocon as his running mate? Or I may be reading this too generously. You might think Tucker Carlson threatened Trump that he might be assassinated. You might think that. I could not possibly comment. This astonishing event. Carlson phones Trump from Australia in June, tells him if he chooses a neocon like Marco Rubio instead of Carlson's pal Vance as vice president, he might be, could be, would be assassinated. It is in the New York Times, and Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan put it in paragraph 69. Paragraph 69! Out of 71 paragraphs, paragraph 69 kind of buried the lead. Quoting Mags and Swanee, when word got back to Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago that Mr. Trump might be wavering on Mr. Vance, he intervened. Mr. Carlson, who was visiting Australia on a speaking tour, phoned Mr. Trump and delivered an apocalyptic warning, according to two people briefed on their conversation. He told Mr. Trump that Mr. Rubio could not be trusted, that he would work against him and would try to lead America into nuclear war. Mr. Carlson, who declined to comment for this article, told Mr. Trump that Mr. Burgum could not be trusted either. Mr. Carlson told Mr. Trump in that June phone call that he believed that if he chose a neocon as his VP, then the U.S. intelligence agencies would have every incentive to assassinate Mr. Trump in order to get their preferred president. Now, maybe I'm being old-fashioned, but where I comes from, if you phone the Republican nominee for president of the United effing States and you tell him if he doesn't pick the right candidate to be his running mate, the intel community will have every incentive to assassinate him. And like 4 weeks after that, somebody tries to assassinate him. And 2 days after that, he chooses your pick as his running mate. Eyebrows will be raised, even by the Secret Service. Are they talking to Tucker Carlson about this? To Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, who sourced this story of Carlson's warning, threat, or really good guess? Are they talking to J.D. Vance? I mean, for the second straight day, Eric Trump went on television and insisted about his father that some unknown they tried to take his life. And I know Eric is challenged, but he also said that to CNN, where Jake Tapper, a journalistic seat filler, replied with absolutely nothing to say that isn't true. They literally tried to kill him this week. The more challenged of the Trump moron twins told Fox the day before. And before you say Tucker Carlson couldn't possibly be the they, besides which he was warning Trump that, like, the CIA would assassinate him if he chose the wrong vice president. 4 weeks before somebody actually tried to, 48 hours before he chose the right vice president. You say, no way. I say, have you ever met Tucker Carlson? In unrelated news, CNN reports that the U.S. intel community was told by a human source about a plot by Iran to assassinate Trump. That the U.S. intel community was told this in the last few weeks. No indication that the guy who actually tried to assassinate Trump was connected to the malefactor here, Tucker Carlson, or maybe Iran, I don't know. Also, no indication that the Secret Service ignored this. In fact, the sources insist security around Trump was increased after the Iran story reached somebody's desk. Just as Carlson was calling Trump from Australia and said, don't pick a neocon or, you know, they'll want to back and to the left, back and to the left, back and to the left. While Trump still has not called the family of the man who actually died defending his family from MAGA gunman Thomas Matthew Crooks, President Biden did phone the family, and the widow said she appreciated the gesture, but she felt she had to honor her late husband by refusing to take the call. On the other hand, she said she bore the president no ill will and blamed only the shooter. And Trump still hasn't called because, well, of course, the guy who got killed wasn't him, so why would he care? A technical irony on the shooting has been reported by England's Channel 4. The Trump campaign targeted the shooter's family, targeted him in a database. Matthew Crooks, father of Thomas Matthew Crooks and owner of the AR-15 used Saturday, was in a Trump campaign database in 2016, profiling millions of voters in the battleground states in a secret program designed to target specific voters with pro-gun messages during the campaign. It had identified both the father and the mother as very likely to be gun owners and hunters and Republicans and susceptible to pro-gun messaging. The British news operation obtained that Trump database in 2016 and reported on its existence then. No idea if the campaign actually contacted the Crooks family. No further information on the separate story from a Pittsburgh television newsroom that neighbors often saw Trump campaign signs in the yard around the Crooks family home. Nevertheless, Trump was shot at by a MAGA gun nut. Some polling about the assassination. Morning Consult concludes that 3 in 5 voters blame American political rhetoric. They say it's responsible for the environment that made shooting at Trump possible. They asked voters Monday, and they got down to brass tacks, too. Which person or group is to blame for the rhetoric and the environment and thus the violence? 29% blame Biden. 31% blame the Republican Party. 38% blame Trump. Now, at last, some information on the forgotten question, was Trump shot or not shot? The good news is we finally have the testimony of a doctor. The bad news is the doctor is Congressman Ronnie Glug Jackson. He says he's seen and treated Trump's ear, the one Trump had bandaged up like somebody who vaguely remembered Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait. And yes, there were delegates on the floor at the convention in Milwaukee last night wearing homemade versions of Trump's crap shack ear bandage. Yes, it looked like a crowd of winos in a cult wearing Post-its. Speaking of winos in a cult, Dr. Jackson said a little bit of Trump's ear had actually been taken off by the bullet. That's the first time anybody besides Trump has asserted or even tried to confirm Trump's claim that he was even grazed by a shot and not debris or unintended shrapnel or something else. Also, Trump, you let Ronnie Jackson treat your wound? Stand by for sepsis, please. The legal theme? Why the legal theme? One prospect few of us have contemplated. Trump wins, but the Democrats take the Senate and House in landslides. Inauguration is January 20th, and in this scenario, the third Trump impeachment is January 27th? January 27th is my birthday. Under those circumstances, the next president of the United States would be this no-accomplishments freshman senator from Ohio who looks like Rush Limbaugh's sperm donor son, only wearing eyeliner. And we are getting our first perspective on what Republicans and non-crazy Americans think of him. And the answer is, who the F is this guy? Monday polling by YouGov, only 27% of Republicans think that Vance was Trump's best possible pick. They did not ask Tucker Carlson. 29% more say he's okay. 43% of Republicans say he's neither good nor bad, or he is bad, or he's the worst, or they are unsure. CNN polling from just 18 days ago indicates unsure is the driving factor here. Voters were asked for favorable or unfavorable opinions on people simply described to them as being in the news. 27% of Americans had a favorable opinion of Marco Rubio, 34% an unfavorable one, 23% had no opinion on Rubio, 21% said, I never heard of him. As to Vance, 11% favorable, 18% unfavorable, no opinion, 15%, never heard of him, 56%. 56! Vance is nearly as unknown as is Doug Burgum, 66%. Never heard of him either. But 8% had a favorable opinion of Burgum. That's within striking distance of Vance's 11%. That's not good. Then again, something made Trump feel like he just had to pick Vance. Tucker Carlson, deep state, bang, bang, bang. Also from that Ku Klux Klan rally in Milwaukee, only with a decent onstage band, Rudy Giuliani toppled to the floor yesterday in the afternoon, took about 8 steps down the red carpet walkway, then shuffled to the right like Daffy Duck in Showbiz Bugs and hit the deck. Down goes Giuliani! Down goes Giuliani! To be fair, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Washington correspondent Tia Mitchell notes that Giuliani seemed to be reaching for one of the chairs on the convention floor when he fell, and that thanks to some genius, the red carpet walkways are actually several inches off the floor, and you can't really see where the actual floor is because of shadows cast by the chairs. My evil plan has been unmasked. That, or it was the Scotch. And this, from Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson of North Carolina, the Republican nominee to become governor there, who foretold the new Trump unity scam earlier this month by screaming in church that people he didn't like need killing. Robinson told the Republican Fascist Fest in Milwaukee that Trump is the Braveheart of our time, unquote. I never cease to be mystified by the number of politicians who compare themselves or somebody they claim to like to Braveheart. Braveheart was the 13th and 14th century warrior king of Scotland, whose life was told, kinda, in one of the least anti-Semitic of Mel Gibson's movies. When the British captured Braveheart and tried him for treason and, for one of the first times in world history, for war crimes, including murdering civilians, including children, including nuns, after they found him guilty, they tied Braveheart to the heels of a horse and dragged him through the streets of London naked. Then they hanged him, but they cut him down before he died, and then they emasculated him, eviscerated him, and beheaded him. Then they got tough. The man Mark Robinson compared Trump to then had his head cut into 4 parts and dipped into tar and put on top of a spike on London Bridge, and then they took what was left of the rest of his body and took it on a national tour. But, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, you're telling me Trump is the Braveheart of our time? Go on. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, I suggested here last week that President Biden pull out the stops. The Supreme Court is hated. A new Fox News poll put approval at 38% yesterday. Others have the percentages who believe its judges are utterly partisan in the 60s. Run against Trump, run against the Supreme Court as well. The Washington Post reports he's going to propose legislated term limits and an enforceable ethics code in the immediate future. He also wants a constitutional amendment to override the Supreme Court recent ruling to eliminate broad presidential immunity and immunity for other office holders. He previewed this apparently to the Congressional Progressive Caucus last Saturday. A transcript of the conversation reads, "I'm going to need your help on the Supreme Court because I'm about to come out. I don't want to prematurely announce it, but I'm about to come out with a major initiative on limiting the court. I've been working with constitutional scholars for the last 3 months, and I need some help." Well, cool, but you're not going to pass any of that now, and I don't see where it says you're adding 6 new seats to the bench. Mr. President, to paraphrase Frederick Douglass, the national edifice is on fire. use the presidential immunity. Use it not to say you might do this if the Congress will approve. Impose these things and do it now and let the bastards try to undo it. And I mean now. The Democratic National Committee is still planning to renominate Joe Biden in a virtual roll call in the next few weeks before August 7th. Those who still want him off the ticket are trying to stop that plan to give the party more time to decide. And my God, don't they realize they're Democrats? We don't decide. Congressman Jared Huffman of California went on the record saying that he represents a growing number of members who think the virtual vote is, quote, a terrible idea, a dumb thing. There is a letter being circulated among House Democrats that begins, quote, we respectfully but emphatically request that you cancel any plans for an accelerated virtual roll call. Well, that gives a sense of urgency to the thing. There is a story, and there is another story, and there's another story after that part of that group, literally or just in spirit, is Nancy Pelosi. That she is working behind the scenes, has been since the day after the debate, to change presidential candidates. Let me quote Politico, as dangerous as that might be. One of her colleagues was struck to see her chatting, furtively but openly, with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries last week in a corner of the House Democratic cloakroom in plain sight of a dozen lawmakers. The extent of Pelosi's behind-the-scenes role hasn't been fully revealed and may never be if the former speaker has her way. But I'm told by people familiar with the exchanges that she staged managed phone calls to Jeffries, plotted strategy with the biggest names in Democratic politics, and told one former elected official bluntly that Biden's legacy can't be destroying their party. Since the president's excellent press conference last week and his even better speech in Detroit, I have returned to being agnostic here, but God damn it, let's make up our minds. There cannot be more than 2 weeks left to clear this up either way. By then, polls will fully reflect the Pennsylvania shooting at Trump, the selection of Vance, Tucker Carlson, and the thing that rhymes with bassination debt, and Biden's latest impact. And the reason I'm agnostic again? I mean, I've only been agnostic like twice since 1970. The Times reported last night that rather than take more input from more Democrats and more advisors, Joe Biden has tightened his circle. And now he isn't even talking to his own pollsters. Ordinarily, this might make you reach for Rudy Giuliani's stash of scotch. Except the 538.com average of polls, which shows Biden's disapproval hovering in general at 56%, shows the national polls averaging +2 for Trump. But the 538 Electoral College model, which 11 days ago showed Trump winning by 4 votes in the Electoral College, now shows Biden winning in 53 out of every 100 simulations. Biden with a 53% chance of an Electoral College victory, and moreover, winning by 277 Electoral College votes to 261 for Trump. Christ, give me some of that stuff you gave Rudy. I don't know. That might not be strong enough. Maybe give me some of that stuff you gave Braveheart. Also of interest here, deja vu all over again. MSNBC postpones a Joe Scarborough show from the convention out of fear he'd say something that would piss off Trump, while other anchors there, including a woman I used to live with in a Trump building who Trump tried to get killed 8 years ago, say he looks serene. They did it to me in 2008, and they are doing it to NBC and the MSNBC talent right now. I can smell it. I will bet you actual cash money, upwards of $30, that the Republicans are threatening the executives of NBC right now, just as they did to get me off the air 16 years ago. Worst persons and an updated things I promised not to tell about. GOP v. NBC. That's next. This is an all-new edition of Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Except when it effing repeats itself. MSNBC anchors sucking up to the Republican presidential nominee? Republican thugs going into the offices of NBC News and suggesting some of the other MSNBC anchors had better be taken off the air during GOP events? 2024 unfolding before our eyes? No, sir. 2008. They've already done this little dance of fellating Trump's whatever. The details in a new Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. Honorable mention, Jon Stewart and Bill O'Reilly. And what do they have in common? Well, the year 2003. But besides that, Stewart had O'Reilly on his show last night, and I suppose there will be something I can make fun of tomorrow. But for now, I have only this to say. Anytime I hear that somebody is talking to Bill O'Reilly, I flash back to his conversation with his producer at Fox, Andrea Macris, and I wonder if during the conversation, Bill is sitting there with a vibrator up his tush. The Bronze, worse, my old pals Joe Scarborough and Katie Turr. Joe's bosses did something he didn't like, so Joe reverted to his first decade on MSNBC, and he pissed on the tent. In the tent. Monday, his NBC Masters canceled his show, postponed it really. His show is called Rehashed Political Talking Points starring Joe Scarborough, who judges which way the wind blows, and if Trump won't let him be vice dictator, Joe Scarborough will pretend to support Biden while Joe Scarborough sabotages everybody else who works there, and he steals other men's wives. Anyway, I think that's what the show is called. I haven't watched lately. So anyway, on Monday, they were all in Milwaukee for the fascist convention and a live version of the show from there, and they didn't put Joe on. I know! CNN reported this was out of fear at NBC that somebody would make a, quote, inappropriate comment on live television that could be used to assail the program and network as a whole while discussing Trump's assassination attempt. Wait, I thought that was the point of the program. Joey Scars not happy. Now, normally when he's not happy, he just threatens and blackmails management and he undercuts them in anonymous quotes to news outlets. But this time, Joey Scars trashed his employers on their own network. Quote, next time we are told there will be a news feed replacing us, we will be in our chairs and the news feed will be us, or they can get somebody else to host the show. Firstly, he said this more or less continuously off the air since 2003. Secondly, NBC, this is your chance. He just threatened to quit, and he breached his contract by what he said on the air. You have 73 people on this show. Would anybody notice he's gone? Other than the improvement in the smell in the studio? All right, you'd have to get new graphics and calling it Morning Mika. Big deal. I mean, does anybody miss the original hosts? Checks notes, David Gregory and Contessa Brewer. The one they swapped in for Brewer and for the previous Mrs. Scarborough is named Mika Brzezinski, one of the nicest people in the world, as long as she's unemployed. When she has a contract on a television network, Marie effing Antoinette. She actually said something. It seemed like now more than ever is a day, a time when we would like to be on. I think our viewers agree with that. Now, to be fair, I will defend Scarborough in the next segment because I gather that what so enraged Joey enough to lash out on the air and risk getting fired and risk all that money, and God, he loves all that money, is that Scarborough heard about this, what I heard when they did it to me 16 years ago, that the Republican Party demanded that NBC do this. More coming up. As to Turr, I'm so sorry about her. I mean, I apologize to you that I helped her get her career started. She was going to be a painter, and when she moved in with me in 2006, I said, well, I know you don't want to do what your dad and mom did, but you have a natural instinct for what a news report from the field should look like. You're natural on camera. That was the last of the painting. I'm sorry, it's my fault. Katie loves the money, too. Trump at the RNC, and she says, quote, I will tell you, even just looking at his face in this video, I've never seen Trump with a look like that on his face, not once. Chris Jansing, I think, saw where this was going and tried to save the segment. Looks almost pensive, Jansing said. Tur then says, serene. Yeah, Katie, did he look as serene as 8 years ago when he tried to get his mobs to kill you? Because he looked so serene at his fascist rallies at the thought of them killing you, and so many of us came to your defense and lashed out against him and comforted you in person and on the phone for months and years thereafter. And now we have to remind everybody that Trump tried to get you killed, and we have to remind them because they may have forgotten just like you have. I am ashamed of you more than at any point in the past. More than when you lied about me to the Washington Post and New York Times. So I wouldn't comment about your career, and I was going to say positive things then. God, what a disaster. The runner-up, worser, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. Once again, I'd like to point out, the god of teleprompters is a vengeful and spiteful god. The Republicans have spent months insisting that President Biden can only function if he has a teleprompter. On Monday, Speaker Mike Johnson's prompter failed at the RNC while he was introducing the next speaker, and he literally had no idea what to say next or who the next speaker he was introducing was because Mike Johnson had violated the first rule of Prompter Club, which is always have a hard copy of the script somewhere on you, or if you're introducing somebody, write his goddamn name on your wrist. Then Senator Ron Johnson, no relation to any human beings. Ron looks like the first thing every morning they drain the color from his face and his eyes to make him look as post-mortem as possible. Ron Johnson got up and he really hewed to that new Trump unity line, that serenity that Katie saw. Johnson told the convention that Democratic policies are a, quote, clear and present danger to the country. Afterwards, Johnson says he meant not to say that and to give an entirely different speech spreading beauty and light. But that the prompter guy loaded the old mean speech in the prompter, and he, Johnson, of course, just read the old one, being an idiot and a Russian. I learned it phonetically. The prompter problem probably also explains that when the new Republican Trump Unity Convention was supposed to rise and sing Kumbaya, the Democrats are still Americans. Instead, they chanted F Joe Biden, because it was on the prompter, probably. I don't know. I think they need to find out where this prompter guy was last Saturday. This could all be his fault. He probably got Scarborough postponed, too. Finally, the winner, the worst. Who could top any of this? Hugo Lowell, the estimable political writer of the newspaper The Guardian, scoop after scoop on the Trump prosecutions. He tweeted some more breaking news the other day. Pretty good scoop, pretty bad typing. And I quote exactly as written. At Hugo Lowell, hearing from multiple people that Trump will make an appearance at the RNC tonight around 8 p.m., but he's not expected to speak, would be Trump's first public appearance since he was shit in the ear at his rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday. Let me just read that last part one more time. Would be Trump's first public appearance since he was shit in the ear at his rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday. Now, once again, this would explain this whole lack of clarity about what exactly did hit Trump on Saturday. I mean, never mind the P-tape. He was shit in the ear. Probably wouldn't be the first time. Seriously, everybody makes mistakes like this. I once went on network radio and I rushed through a script with too many K's in it and not enough time left in the show. And instead of saying in a sportscast, the mecca of quail club hunting, I said something else that was about the anatomy of a quail. Shots like this happen. So why put Hugo Here's spit in your ear lol on the worst persons list for an easily understood and laugh out loud funny typo, especially in these times when we can use every laugh we can get? Why put him on the worst persons list? Why call him the worst person in the world? Because he deleted this. It's gold, Jerry. It's gold. Hugo, why did you delete it? It's the smartest thing that's going to come out of the Republican convention this year. Lol. Today's worst person in the world in the ear. Anybody get any pictures of that? In the ear? The number one story on the countdown and things I promised not to tell, and MSNBC rubs the Republican Party. Cancels Joe Scarborough's show from the GOP fascist convention in Milwaukee. And as I outlined earlier, it puts Eric Trump on live with poor brainwashed Katie Tur, and she says, Daddy looks serene. And it's not just that it looks like NBC News is prostituting itself in preparation for a Republican takeover of the country, and the Tur and the postponed Scarborough message from Comcast is, please don't arrest us, or at least don't arrest our money. Not only that, but for some of us, wow, does this crap sound familiar? NBC, corporate NBC, is in reruns. They were already blackmailed once by the Republicans, long before Trump was sent here by the devil. And boy, did this flash me back, because this happened to me at MSNBC in 2008, courtesy the supposed sane Republicans. And it underscores that they have never been sane. There have never been sane Republicans. They have always longed to dictate to the media what it can and cannot say about whichever asshole is its presidential candidate. And thanks to people like Tom Brokaw, they often get away with it. Chris Matthews and I were co-anchoring the Republican convention on MSNBC in 2008. He was there at the convention in Minnesota. I was in the studios at 30 Rock in New York, ostensibly, so I could also anchor hurricane coverage, though it was pretty clear that at least half the reason I was not in Minneapolis was because the Republicans had threatened NBC or said they could not guarantee my safety there or something like that. So I was the one on September 2nd, 2008, who had to throw it to a video that we had been told by the Republicans was a tribute to the dead of 9/11 that they were playing in the theater in their convention in Minnesota. It was not a tribute. It was a snuff film. All of the images that the networks had stopped showing of 9/11 within weeks or even days of the attacks, all of them were in this snuff film. People jumping, falling to their deaths from the World Trade Center, endless replays of the planes hitting the towers, dismembered bodies in the plaza, the building collapses, the equally terrifying scenes at the Pentagon, and all with the grotesque voiceover from that fink Robert Davi, emphasizing that this was all the Democrats' fault. The message was, they might as well have phrased it this way, elect Obama and you will die like this. I was angry, just on that base level. For that 5.5 years I had been back at MSNBC, we had been rigorous about not showing any of that video that the Republicans had just forced upon us by lying to us about it. There were rules that if we had to, for some reason, need some snippet, we would show only still images, and even then only with extensive warnings to the viewers. But I knew from my conversations with the president of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, who I had known for 28 years at that point, that he would insist that on the scene in Minneapolis, Matthews and Tom Brokaw, whose career at NBC I had resuscitated after Brian Williams had buried him alive 2 years earlier, I knew from what Griffin told me that one or both of them would rebuke the GOP for showing not a 9/11 tribute, but as I just said, a 9/11 snuff film. The snuff film ended. We came out to Brokaw and Matthews, and Brokaw kind of coughed, and Matthews said, well, and he turned to Brokaw and said in that loose fire hose delivery he had, Tom, that kind of underscores terrorism. Big thing for Republicans. They try to stop Obama. Brokaw droned on approvingly. The Republicans sneaking a snuff film of banned video onto MSNBC, and by the way, also onto CNN, onto NBC proper, onto CBS, onto ABC without any warning. That was not mentioned. Back to New York and Keith. I was supposed to ad-lib a tease about what we were expecting from the Republican convention for the rest of the night and then throw to a commercial. Instead, I said, and this is a paraphrase, the original tape disappeared that night, that before we moved on, I felt I needed to apologize. That we at MSNBC, and for that matter at NBC News, had extremely strict rules about not showing the video the Republicans had just shown you via our network without any warning, without any context, and by lying to us. And we certainly would not have shown the horror and death and blamed it on the Democrats, or for that matter on the Republicans. I said if we had done such a thing ourselves, there would have been people fired. The public program the GOP provided said that was going to be a 9/11 tribute film, I said, and so did the private conversations with the network, which included the reminder from NBC and MSNBC that we had rules against showing the scenes of horrible death and mutilation and destruction. So I apologized on behalf of whoever trusted the Republicans to live up to their word that MSNBC viewers were forced to see the video our network had promised never to show them. So, 3 nights later, without as much as an email to me, this Griffin had called my agent and told her I was fired and Matthews too from our coverage of the upcoming McCain-Obama debates. I happened to be off that night in the press box watching a Mets-Phillies game at Shea Stadium, so she had to relate these details to me by phone as I walked down the many ramps in the stadium's bowels and headed towards the subway. I told her to call Griffin back and tell him I was quitting on the spot right then. And he could work his way out of the ensuing disaster by himself. Liberal network MSNBC fires liberal host Olbermann for criticizing conservatives for sneaking 9/11 snuff film onto MSNBC. He could work his way out of that disaster any way he chose, and then he could wait for my response on Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, the PBS NewsHour, any other news program that bothered to ask, and in court. I made a few phone calls to friendly voices within the NBC management structure, got from them a clearer picture of what had happened, and despite the spotty cell service along the elevated train line heading back into Manhattan, I got a message from a newspaper reporter friend who neatly tied together all that I was hearing elsewhere. Tom Brokaw is going around NBC saying he got you fired from the debates because the Republicans told him to. 9, maybe 10 months earlier, the same Phil Griffin had come to me and asked me if I would be okay with Brokaw appearing during our weekly coverage of the Democratic and Republican primaries. Just a couple of minutes, buddy, like from a perspective desk. That's all he wants to do. He's so unhappy. Brian Williams has frozen him out of everything. I was appalled, but not surprised. The power had gone to Brian's head. And of course there, it had not met very much resistance. Plus, as I said to Griffin, you're asking me if I'd like to add Tom Brokaw's experience and Tom Brokaw's gravitas to stuff I'm anchoring when I'm not sure I know as much as I really know to do this the right way? Tom, to be fair, fit in beautifully, and twice. After those long Tuesday evenings during the primaries, he sent me brief emails awarding me what he called the game ball, because he was so impressed by my ability to balance the roles of political anchor and political commentator. Having tried this myself, he wrote, I know what a perilous tightrope this is. Game ball to KO. I mock them now, but they meant so much to me then that I printed them out and carried them in my wallet. Until September. And now Brokaw had gotten me fired because, as my newspaper friend said, the Republicans told him to. Well, that wasn't hard to unpack either. Tim Russert had died on the 3rd of June that year. I anchored that night until 2 in the morning. It was still an open wound. There were still tears. We didn't know it then, but the structure of NBC News and the perilous tightrope balancing NBC and MSNBC had died with Tim Russert. So did the role of moderator of the second debate between John McCain and Barack Obama, scheduled for about a month from my subway ride on October 7th, 2008 in Nashville. Tim had not even been buried yet when Brokaw began to angle to get that assignment that was now vacant, along with brushing away the dirt of his penny ante role on the MSNBC perspective desk, leaving us in the lurch in order to take over Tim's spot as Brian's sage sidekick on Big NBC. The month before, August, there had been a story coming out of the east end of the third floor at 30 Rock where NBC News managers sat around not doing much of anything, that a Republican goon named Ed Gillespie had been in there with Griffin and the idiot NBC News president Steve Kappas, trying to get me silenced or fired or off the convention coverage or something, and that somebody prominent from NBC News was in there with Gillespie or was invoked by Gillespie. The rumor mill was not confident in who it was or what exactly they were doing. That Friday night in September 2008, as I switched from the Elevated 7 train to the Underground F, the whole thing came together. Before my comments about the GOP convention 9/11 snuff film, Gillespie had come in and had somehow vaguely threatened Kappas and Griffin about me, using as leverage the debate which Tom Brokaw was now supposed to moderate, the one that had been Russard's. And when I apologized for their snuff video on our air, Gillespie must have turned it into an either-or. Get rid of me, or McCain would refuse to participate in any debate moderated by Brokaw. Tom Brokaw had already come back from the dead once in 2008. I had made that happen, and he would be damned if he would be forced to do it a second time. But as the train took me home to an apartment I was now going to have to sell since I had quit MSNBC on the spot for folding to such obvious blackmail, something else now occurred to me. Why would MSNBC or NBC or our parent corporation GE actually think that they could remove me from the debate coverage on MSNBC, where the Rachel Maddow show had not yet been born and was only going to premiere the next week, and the 3 times a night my show ran accounted for something like 60% of the entire day's network audience and all of its profits? How did they think they were going to get away with that without a really bad reaction from our audience? Plus, if a newspaper man already knew the Brokaw part, how could this story be avoided? Something like this. MSNBC has announced it had removed its liberal star Keith Olbermann from coverage of the McCain-Obama presidential debates. Sources confirmed former NBC News anchorman Tom Brokaw, now an MSNBC commentator, had helped the Republican Party to blackmail NBC into the decision. Olbermann immediately resigned, saying, quote, "In succumbing to this coercion on behalf of John McCain, NBC has now forfeited any further right to be called a news organization, and I'm sad to say MSNBC, which I built, is now dead." At that point, it dawned on me that the only thing that could save the credibility of the whole NBC News division and the careers of Griffin and Kappas and NBC Network President Jeff Zucker and especially Tom Brokaw was for me to publicly state, to lie, that I had asked to be removed from anchoring the debates because the whatever was just too much blah, blah, blah for me, and I felt I should just stick to the post-debate analysis and commentary and blah, 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 blah. In short, they would have a choice. They could fire me from the debates and destroy everything, including the $100 million a year or so in profits NBC was suddenly making off MSNBC after years of losing about that much. Or I could lie and claim it was my idea and I could save everybody's ass and their money, including my own. I got out of the subway and raced home. I called my agent. I explained it to her. I'm not quitting. In fact, I'm going to get a huge raise. Listen carefully. You call Griffin back and explain to him I will now personally save his job even though he doesn't deserve it. And Kappas's, and Zucker's, and Brokaw's, and everybody else's. I'll take the fall. Instead of letting them get fired by the MSNBC audience, I'll say this was my idea, and it will cost him only $12 million. Oh, and he has to leak the fact that it cost him $12 million. That's the deal. And she paused for a second and she said, "Hey, that's genius. It might not quite be 12, but I bet I get at least 9 million. On Sunday, several news organizations reported I had asked to be taken off the anchor desk for the debates. 2 months and 1 week later, the The New York Times wrote, quote, Keith Olbermann, the anchor of Countdown on MSNBC, has extended his contract through the next presidential election season, the network announced. Mr. Olbermann and MSNBC essentially tore up the 4-year, $4 million a year contract they signed last year and replaced it with one worth about $7.5 million a year. So that was a $3.5 million raise for 4 years to a total of $14 million. Except the new contract added 2 years to my old deal, so the raise was actually $22 million. All stories have punchlines. This punchline is about Brokaw. We would have gotten away with this. NBC would have gotten its money's worth for the $22 million in hush money it had to pay me because it had rolled over for Republican Party blackmail, except Brokaw couldn't keep his mouth shut. So proud was he of preserving his role as moderator of the October 7th debate that he had to explain in explicit detail how he went to his bosses at NBC News and threatened them on behalf of the GOP. I mean, on the record, he said this. September 29th, a lengthy and glowing Brokaw profile in the New York Times. Quote, Mr. Brokaw said that over the summer he'd, quote, advocated within the executive suite of NBC News to modify the anchor duties of the MSNBC hosts Keith Olbermann and Chris Matthews on election night and on nights where there were presidential debates. Mr. Brokaw said he had also conducted some shuttle diplomacy in recent weeks between NBC and the McCain campaign. His mission, he said, was to assure the candidates' aides that despite some negative on-air commentary by Mr. Olbermann in particular, Mr. McCain could still get a fair shake from NBC News, unquote. That was his mission? The hell that was his mission. Happily, Brokaw just could not resist boasting even further. The next sentence reads, quote, Mr. Brokaw said he had been told by a senior McCain aide, whom he did not name, that the campaign had been reluctant to accept an NBC representative as one of the moderators of the 3 presidential debates until his name was invoked. One of the things I was told by this person was that they were so irritated, they said if it's an NBC moderator for any of these debates, we won't go, Mr. Brokaw said. My name came up and they said, oh, hell, we have to do it because it's going to be Brokaw. No insufferable person in all of broadcasting history has a better rep and a better and more undeserved rep than Tom Brokaw. So, when a Trump leans on NBC management because the coverage that he got was not the coverage he wanted, don't think it won't have an effect. Because in 2008, they loved me then, as they love Maddow now. But what they loved about each of us was not the truth we provided, but the money. There is a second punchline. After all this, when the new format came out, MSNBC had David Gregory, quote, anchor, unquote, the debate coverage. Practically all this meant was that I was on the air until 90 seconds before the debates began, which is when I said, now here's David Gregory. And he was on the air for 4 or 5 minutes after the debate ended, which is when he would then say, now here's Keith Olbermann. And on election night, with David officially the anchor of MSNBC's coverage at 10:59 p.m., he said, and bless him for this, with the last voting booth closing at 11 p.m., NBC News can now project the winner of the 2008 presidential election. Keith? Plus, that $22 million, I still have it. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. By the way, I got my comeuppance too, because who was it who the Letterman people called when that guy, John McCain, ended his presidential chances the night that he bailed out on Letterman and, more importantly, lied to Letterman about why he was bailing out? That was actually the last day John McCain had a chance of beating Barack Obama. And who did they call to come over and be the guest instead of John McCain, who was supposed to be on for the whole hour on Letterman that night? Me. I got to be a witness to Dave Letterman taking John McCain apart at the seams, and nobody ever put him back together again. That was it, that night. And the guy who was the producer of my segment, he's now the producer of Morning Joe. Life is funny, isn't it? Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums, and Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, which was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are, of course, by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. My announcer today was the incomparable Stevie Van Zandt. Everything else was pretty much my fault, except the parts that are all Trump. That's Countdown for this, the 112th day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,287th day since convicted felon Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You've got it, President Biden. Use the presidential immunity to stop him from doing it again while we still can. And Republicans, please stop shooting at Trump. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.